All right, so we're really taking a deep dive today into a field that I'd say is pretty crucial, especially if you've flown on a plane, which, most of us have. We're talking about aviation safety officers. You sent over this whole stack of resources from RoleCatcher, and honestly, they're fascinating. Like, you've got career guides in here, interview tips, even stuff about how AI is, changing the game. This isn't just like looking for a job. It's like a backstage pass to an industry that honestly I realized I knew nothing about.
Yeah, that we all just sort of expect that when we get on a plane, it's going to be safe, right?
Yeah.
But there's this whole world of like expertise that actually makes that happen.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of expertise, these role catcher guys, they get right to it. Like they use some pretty intense language. Safeguarding, compliance, risk management. It definitely makes the job sound super important. A little intimidating, maybe, right? But like, what does an aviation safety officer actually do on a daily
Yeah,
basis?
yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah.
I mean, at their core, they are really the guardians of all those like crucial aviation regulations. Their whole job is making sure that airlines, any aviation company really, is following these really important safety rules, like down to the letter. And it's not just like, I don't know, checking boxes on a list. It's about really understanding why those regulations are there in the first place, right? Like,
Yeah.
what are the potential risks? And then making sure that everything that's happening up in the air, even on the ground, follows these like really strict safety standards.
Wow. Okay. So we're talking huge responsibility here. But does that mean, like, picturing someone just buried under a mountain of paperwork, stuck in a tiny office somewhere? What's the work environment really like for an aviation safety officer?
Well, the RoleCatcher stuff did say that a lot of it is office-based. Like you said, poring over reports, analyzing data, things like
Right.
that.
Right.
But there's definitely a good amount of field work involved too. Okay. Aviation safety officers, they go and do on-site inspections, of aircraft, maintenance facilities, all that. They can be called in to investigate if something happens, an incident or accident. And that takes them out into the field to gather evidence, interview people. It's a lot more than just sitting at a desk.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of interacting with people, I saw this thing in the typical interactions section that I thought was interesting. It seems like this role means you're working with a really diverse group of people, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not just about knowing the technical stuff. An aviation safety officer one day might be explaining some really complex regulation to like an airline CEO.
Wow.
And then the next day they're conducting a training for, maintenance technicians.
Oh, wow.
So there's that link between regulations and actually making them happen. You need some serious communication skills for that.
So it's not just about understanding the technical side, but making sure everyone gets it, like from the pilots to the executives, everyone's on the same page when it comes to safety.
Exactly. That's where those, like speaking and customer and personal service skills that you were talking about before, that's where they come in. And, we have to remember, aviation at its heart, it's a service industry, right? Getting people, cargo, safely and quickly from one place to another. And the aviation safety officer, they're a big part of making sure that all happens smoothly.
Totally. Okay, so we've established that this role requires a pretty unique blend of like really knowing your stuff technically, but also being good with people, which I feel like, not every job needs both. But let's dig a little deeper into those technical skills. I'm curious about some of the, I guess, unexpected abilities the guide talks about, like mechanical knowledge. How does that factor into the day-to-day for an aviation safety officer?
So that's where it gets, really interesting. Because aviation safety officers, they need to have this solid understanding of how aircraft work.
Yeah.
The engines, the systems, aerodynamics, all of it.
Right.
It's not like they're out there fixing planes themselves,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to be able to look at technical documents, analyze maintenance records,
Yeah.
and like really spot anything that could, potentially cause a safety issue.
So it's not just about knowing the rules, it's about understanding like the mechanics behind them and how it applies to an actual plane.
Exactly. And that whole mechanical knowledge thing, it gets even more important when you're talking about like investigating incidents. Let's say an engine fails, right?
Right.
An aviation safety officer could be on the team that's, examining the engine, looking at maintenance logs, trying to figure out like the root cause of why it failed.
Huh. That almost sounds like detective work.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, those air disaster documentaries, putting all the clues together to figure out what happened?
Yeah, a little bit of that for sure.
Right.
But it's not just about figuring out what happened. It's using that knowledge to stop it from happening again.
Mm-hmm.
They might recommend changes to procedures, pilot training, maybe even how the aircraft itself is designed.
Oh, wow. So they're not just reacting to something, they're actually trying to, like, get ahead of it.
Yeah, exactly. Proactive. Is that the word?
Fast. Yeah.
And that actually leads into another big thing that the RoleCatcher resources go into, which is career progression. Like, as aviation safety officers get more experience under their belt, they start to take on more responsibility, moving from, just looking at the data to leading teams, shaping safety policies, all that. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So what does that path look like, from, let's say, starting out as an officer to getting into those senior management positions?
Well, it depends on the organization, of course.
Yeah.
But usually you see a move from those like day-to-day tasks to thinking more long-term, more strategically.
Right.
So like someone starting out might be focused on audits, inspections, that sort of thing. But a senior manager, they might be the one who creates the entire safety program for the whole company.
So it really is like going from just making sure people are following the rules to like building that culture of safety in the company.
That is a great way to put it, yeah. And that's where being a good leader is so important. Senior aviation safety officers, they're leading teams, managing budgets, really fighting for those safety improvements within their organization. They could even be working on, like, industry-wide initiatives, like with the regulatory agencies or professional groups.
Wow. So there's like a real management track for this too. Huh. It sounds like a career where you can really, move up and learn a lot along the way.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of learning and growing, there's one more thing we got to talk about, which is how fast aviation itself is changing. We've been talking about, the airlines, we all know, the regulations. Yeah. But what about drones?
Oh, right. Everyone's talking about drones.
Yeah. Exactly. Autonomous flight, even that space tourism stuff that's starting up. It's a whole new world, right?
Mm.
How does an aviation safety officer's job change with all that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It seems like everything we've talked about so far, being able to adapt, communication, knowing how to solve problems, it's got to be even more important now.
100%. I mean, imagine you're an aviation safety officer, but you're working with, like, drone deliveries.
Okay, yeah.
You got to think about managing the airspace in a whole different way, right?
Yeah.
How do you make sure drones are flying safely with all the planes already up there? How do you even write regulations for autonomous flight that are, like, strict enough but also flexible enough that they'll still work as tech changes?
It's like you're writing the rule book for a whole new way of flying.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I think makes this career so interesting. You're not just out there enforcing the rules someone else made. You might be the one making the rules for the future.
That's really cool. Okay, before we wrap up, I got to ask about this. The RoleCatcher stuff also talked about, like, interview prep, which honestly, some of those sample interview questions were kind of scary. What advice would you give to someone who's, like, getting ready for an interview for an aviation safety officer job? Like, how do you even prepare for that?
I always tell people the biggest thing is to show how much you care about aviation safety.
Yeah.
Like, that you're really passionate about it. Then show that you can think critically, that you're always up for learning new things. Because interviewers, they're not just looking for someone who knows the rules by heart, right? They want to see how you tackle a challenge, how you explain your ideas to people, how you deal with pressure, because that's a big part of the job.
So show them you've got the skills and the right attitude to do well in a job that's always changing and, let's be honest, can be pretty demanding.
Exactly. And honestly, don't be afraid to talk about experiences you've had, even if they don't seem like they're about aviation. Like, maybe you worked on a project that had to be perfect. Not a single detail could be wrong.
Right.
Or maybe you had to explain something really complicated to someone who didn't understand all the technical stuff. All of that shows you've got skills that would be useful as an aviation safety officer, even if it wasn't like a plane-related job before.
That's super helpful. Well, we really covered a ton of ground today. We talked about what an aviation safety officer does every day, the challenges out there for the whole industry. As we're finishing up, what's the one thing you hope our listeners really take away from all of this?
I hope they understand just how important these professionals are, how they're the ones that keep our skies safe. Really, it's a tough job, no doubt. You need that mix of like technical know-how, people skills, and you got to be dedicated to safety no matter what.
Definitely.
But for anyone out there who loves aviation, who wants a job where they're making a real difference, it's an incredibly rewarding path. You can make a career out of it.
Yeah, I love that. It's not just about the roles and the planes. It's about the people who make sure that we can all, get on a plane and feel confident that we're going to be safe. So to everyone out there who's working as an aviation safety officer, thank you for everything you do. And to everyone listening, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep looking up.